What's going on, guys? We're just going over some schematics that I talked about last year that are doing really well into this year. Really nice commons trades. You don't really need to be. You could put these in your long-term port and just sit back and relax with like some stops beneath these weekly areas, right? DraftKings is a fantastic looking chart. It always has been a really nice looking chart ever since we had this change of hands happening over here, right? So this was a previous distribution phase, as you guys can see, with the amount of volume up towards the highs, right? The lower highs afterwards, the amount of volume on the next earnings candle with a rejection point. And then obviously these gap downs, really heavy volume on those gap downs, really nice recovery, one more lower high, and then obviously just another full on out correction into another gap, right? So we filled two gaps within this distribution. There was no other area on the chart that made as most sense as obviously targeting into that $29 gap. And then we ripped back to the upside, right? And we reclaimed the lower extremes of where the previous distribution was, meaning this support, which is off of that gap fill. Rip back higher, pull back lower, really low volume on the pullback, and then we got a really nice strong pop off of that zone with a lot of volume and a really nice looking candle behind that, right? So we knew that there was a change of hands happening here since the distribution was completely gone. And then it got another pullback, and then it just filled the smaller time frame daily gap. That was just your secondary high or low from the first one right here. That resulted in a 1 week change of hands if we're looking at this from the higher time frames, retracement into the previous support, and then obviously claiming that, clinging onto it with a really big amount of volume and a really nice looking candle, right? And we got one more pullback, really low volume on the pullback, right? We filled a daily gap, started to get a pop. That could have just been another higher low, right? It's just taking structure that respects this higher low and looking at it from here and saying, oh, wow, that's really good risk to reward, right? So, obviously targets were into the mid 40s to be safe, right? 45, 46, and then eventually above this high up here at 49.57. Now, if we go to the daily chart, this is just a really, really, really nice looking daily chart. We obviously need a lot of digestion here, but if we obviously get like a decent amount, we're able to obviously see some of the premium getting chopped up a little bit on this name, and we start seeing the proper amount of digestion for a 15% move with that kind of volume. I mean, if you guys are looking at this volume, this is the biggest volume we've actually had within DraftKings ever since all the way back here. So, that is, and that's pretty notable since it's been through this whole entire previous range, right? So whenever we digest this, maybe we get a few inside bars up here, and then we start seeing the momentum spiking in again off of like a maybe 3-4 inside bars. That would be a fantastic trade opportunity for like just an easy base hit win. I do this all the time with certain names on earnings candles that have no sign of going lower, and they digest a little bit into, obviously after that digestion takes place, they finally get their continuations, right? So with a couple other charts on my watch list that I really like, PANW would be one of those names, right? So this is another really, really interesting chart to me, just because we obviously had not enough buyers to continue the trend higher on this staircase that we created through the gap fill. We couldn't continue the trend higher off of this range being built. And that was within that window, right? So that was within that December window whenever everything was starting to look really weak, right? We started to get a lot of pullbacks, right? And this one saw a really nice pullback into just another weekly higher low. And now basically, whoa, what is that up there? What the hell? Oh, that's the split, dude. My drawings are there from whenever before the split. Okay, so anyways, obviously we had like this big time gap, okay? And from that gap, we recovered most of the gap, and then we eventually got through, and then the redistribution for a smaller amount of time happened here into like 204. A lot of profit taking. We got another weekly higher low. We pulled our way higher, another higher low, and then started to get above this big weekly pivot that we couldn't pivot above before, right? And then we got another gap and then a continuation into the report. The report actually marked it down, and then it recovered it the entirety of the way back to the upside, basically here. So um, I think that this one is obviously going to be a path of least resistance where the range gets really tight, and then we have a decent little breakout trade somewhere around up here, and then it eventually gets the breakout, the continuation, and the move. It's kind of similar to the crowd trade that I was in that ran over 100% or about 100%. Right around here, right? And this was absorbing all of the previous high. And then it actually broke through this range that was beneath the all-time highs. And then it put in 4 inside bars, right? And then it got really nice continuation to the upside, like it was almost effortless. We go over to PANW, and that's kind of what I'll be looking for, in my opinion, over here on PANW. I'm not going to be the guy to just take this right into Tuesday. No way. I'm going to give it a little bit of time. If it just completely continues its way to the upside effortlessly throughout Tuesday, then I'm probably just going to miss the setup. But yeah, I really do like the PANW chart. We still actually have a little bit of the gap here to close. And where I kind of want to see this one remain controlled off of would just be like if we were to pull fibs, take a look at those fibs and say, okay, yeah, I mean, we have really easy areas to start watching here where this one can pull back into a discounted range and hold a higher low off of this candle on the daily chart, which would look like an inside bar in the daily, but it would look a little better on the hourly. Or this one basically just trades towards the upper range and then it starts to really tighten up here towards this upper range, right? Obviously around here at like 198 seems to be like an hourly area to obviously take control of as well. But we don't really know yet. I mean, we have to let price action tell us what's going on here with PANW. But I think it's a fantastic looking chart. It's not the best looking just yet, but I think it could just get better and better looking. So with Nike, this one was very weird on actually how it played out. This is one of those charts, guys, where like I really liked it, but the fact that it just was like selling through this previous support here on that kind of volume is kind of what like faked me out, just because I don't like looking at daily candles that look like this, and I don't like trading long off of daily candles that look like that. So, you know, it was a very tough trade to take there. Um, and this is schematic that I've been looking at for a very long time, right? And it looks fantastic now. It just needs to see a little bit more of a signal. I don't think it looks super good yet. I don't think it's A plus just yet. But we're getting obviously the shakeout here at this new low at 69 bucks, and then we reclaim into that 71 area. Now we just have a weekly inside bar here on almost matching volume into from this week, right? So obviously, you know, this wasn't a big time seller act technically, and right, and a lot of the volume actually came in towards the lows, and then subsequently what we got was a low volume rally back to the upside, right? So when you're looking at the volume that's pouring in towards these lows here, guys, it doesn't necessarily all have to be just a seller, right? Because obviously the daily candle does look like that, but like on your hourly, you know, you have like a lot of volume in that orb candle, and like there was obviously some sort of buyer that was sitting within this area of price, I would think. And then you just got a lot of low volume into like a really weak afternoon type of sell off here, right? So this isn't necessarily like any sort of like really super weak seller dominant name. Obviously, if you're looking at the hourly chart, this chasing along with like how this price action looks and how the structure looks, just it's not a good idea. And that's why I kind of like it moving forward, is because like if it does get a pullback, is it going to stick to the support? Or is it going to go for a new lower low, right? And then that second lower low brings a much more clear signal, right? Meaning like we get a much more aggressive sell maybe, and then we get a new low, and then we get back above this floor, right? And then we start looking like an actual spring where this starts to put in like hourly inverse head and shoulders type of look, right, where it starts breaking structure above the previous lower highs and finally gets the spring and the continuation all the way back up to the 80s, which I do think is going to happen. That would be the picture perfect scenario, right? But if we pull back and on Nike we pull back into this support, we hold that support, I might think about taking it. It's a fantastic looking trade, and I would probably buy a lot of time and think about targeting into 85. And I think up into 85 could be something that's like very realistic. Is it going to be realistic on 2 week out expiration? No. Could it be realistic on summer expiration? Yeah. And sometimes you guys just got to go for that, right? And sometimes I do too, right? Like we talk about a lot of these charts that look very accumulative, right? And a lot of these charts that look fantastic, right? Like I was all over Marvel here last year whenever this was like basing within the earnings gap. And 6 month out contracts would pay a few thousand%, I'm pretty sure, from down here at 70 into like 125. I'm pretty sure like I think it was actually not summer contracts. I'm sorry. It was like January, February contracts. Paid ridiculous amounts of money on accumulations that are like this, and we have a lot of those accumulations that are still potentially moving or they're just beginning. I like QCOM. I think QCOM is a fantastic looking chart just because we have a very large rectangular range here. We have an inside bar in the weekly, and obviously this has been one of those charts that look pretty damn good in terms of like it swept beneath this low, right? So it swept beneath that low. It got a new low, and then we started to get a lot of momentum to the upside here. And that's whenever equilibrium was starting to get controlled of this range, right? So, we're testing back into that. We're kind of building out a really nice like reaccumulation potential off of that area. This is like right off of where we had like a 165 support, or I'm sorry, resistance turn into support. This is also where like all of that support was trying to be built back here in November, right? And then we still have a lot of room back to the upside above these highs at 177 and potentially all the way into 181. So this is a really, really good looking chart, right? And if you go to your EMAs and you take a look at the EMAs, they're really nicely aligning with like price action here right now. If you go into the hourly chart, it's pretty simple. It's basically just like what this thing can do around this. I would say like if we could get a pullback, it would be fantastic to look at this thing. If it doesn't get a pullback, I'd be looking at this thing to like maybe breach into the gap, target the upper gap. Like to me, that's whenever things get a little bit more risky. But I just really like the chart, so I'm gonna have to find a way on how to execute this one leading into next week. I'm probably just gonna be buying time with it, if you want me to be honest. I don't think I'm going to be trading a lot of shorter expirations. I'm just going to go with like my higher time frame accumulation trades and take a look at those and think about some swings on those with summer expiration probably, or I'm thinking maybe summer expiration or maybe maybe about April. April might be the closest I do. Probably March will be the closest I do next week in terms of my trades. Jeez, man. Okay, so other ones that I like. PANW would be one of the ones that I like. Well, how's LRCX looking? Because that was a semiconductor that we've been talking about for a very long time, and I never got my price alerts on it or anything that looked really nice when I would take a look at the chart. But this one's really, really nice. It's just hard to like think about how to trade this one. Like we have a big level here, we have a gap here to the downside at 81. We have EMAs have to be caught up to price by now. Yeah. Um it's not good looking enough to take like a options trade on. I have commons on this, by the way, in case anyone wants to think about buying commons. Um most of my commons ads are like down here on this support rather than up here above this resistance. A flush into the gap would be really nice, but that would also be a major loss of a level here on the weekly, which is right around here. And I mean, this thing's trying to get out of that lower high type of scenario and turn those into higher lows. So, I mean, if this were to pop down and then get a really nice like strength off of it, that would be a fantastic trade for the upside, but like I don't know if it's going to do that. Um, and that would be something that would probably need to be happen through like I would say probably news needs to drive that thing lower into that area, right? Unless the market just gains this random amount of weakness that, drives all of the semiconductors lower. If we go into like SMH, I would say that, things are still getting a little bit risky when you're looking at like the SMH chart and you're looking at like what's going on with like overall semiconductors. I mean, guys, you can't tell me that like SMH necessarily looks like a good long right now, can you? Like I personally can't say that looks good. And like Nvidia is still floating in that gap with no seller, so it's kind of difficult to long semiconductors. It really is. And I feel like the amount of euphoria as they push this thing higher. I want to tell you guys, I never said anything about this being like a clear rejection point off of this area. I had never said anything about that. I never said anything about, this has to play in off the 618. I'm just giving you guys some areas to look out for to like minimize your areas of focus on a chart because that's very important as well. You don't want to be focusing on, shorting Nvidia ever since the bottom of the gap and waste your focus on that all the way to the top of the gap and then none of it ever plays out, right? That's why I was saying you want to be looking at like your 618 area. We never had a true signal off that 618 spot. I shorted that. That was another green trade that went back to break even where I was sizing in at around 134-ish, 135-ish, took it down into 129, and then 129 to like 130, and then I tried to get the continuation off of it, and I just never did. Right, and that's totally okay, right? Because I'm trading good risk to reward. I'm putting stops on my trades before they run red, because there was no clear signal over here just yet. And like I said, I mean, this does not really validate a really clean risk to reward short side trade until we were to actually lose this daily level of support, just because they've claimed that from buyers. And obviously there was shorts that we're obviously shorting the hole in a very, very overzealous way down here. So whenever they go underwater, they're going to get squeezed out on those retests if they successfully hold those retests, and then its price is just going to push higher into the gap, right? So I obviously managed my risk very well there, and I said, okay, yeah, like any type of trade I get above this level here at 130 to 127 is going to be an immediate break-even stop. Just because, we obviously have still a redistribution potential. It's just there's been no signs, and no one said ever that, oh, this has to sell off the golden pocket. That's not how things work. It's just not, right? Like things don't sell because of the golden pocket. Obviously, that's a very, very optimal fill type of area on a chart, just because that's where sellers find pretty nice value for something based off of, obviously they found value in this sell lower, so they're going to find value at the discounted area of the next of the leg back into where they sold from, right? It's a very basic, simple concept here, but you guys got to remember, like, there's a lot of imbalance within a gap that large, right? And obviously the redistribution may need the entirety of the gap to be filled before we move lower. And if you're looking at the actual gap and where it actually started from, it actually started from like technically right here into the pre-market, or if you're looking up here into 135.90, it's right around there, right? And we actually started to see these two new highs being sold off a little bit into the into above that gap and into that gap if you're looking at like the pre-market open and like the pre-market high of that day, right? So that's a very, very interesting looking chart to me, just because we obviously have been nowhere near uh, the invalidation of the thesis, right? It's actually, I don't want to be that guy, and I don't want to just keep shorting this one and losing. And I haven't really lost that much on this one, but um, I'm going to obviously look at this one probably up towards 140.76 and eventually into that gap at 143. I'm not going to let go of the thesis just because, you know, this rally higher is it's not of anything significantly strong. It's really not. And if this starts to really weaken as we reach towards more of the top of the gap, and then we get into like a window of weakness, or we get closer into like an apex, and this thing starts to really redistribute, or maybe it continues into new highs and gets another UTAD. I mean, this could be another crazy, crazy rerun on that trade. It's just, it's not ready yet. There's no signals. I'm not going to be trading this one right into the new week. I'm going to need a very clear daily candle, and then I'll trade it, right? If we could get a very clear daily candle and a very clear depiction of sellers stepping in somewhere off the gap, that's whenever you want to trade this, because we're at the point in the gap here now, guys, where, you know, if this one wanted to move lower throughout all of this weak leg of price action, then it would move into the gaps. It would move into 125. It would move back down into this 130. It would move into potentially 118, right? And with this being, you know, obviously something that really shows its hand up into the top of the gap fill, that's a 12-point potential here for the downside to then go target 130, right? And if you're not going to catch the very high, the very top high, right? You're not. That's never going to happen. So you could just call it 10 points to the downside, or maybe 9. Um, so obviously, with that being said, that would be the NVIDIA chart. Obviously, there is no chance you could ever think about a long on this trade. If you wanted to get long, the areas to get long were somewhere down here or somewhere throughout here, and maybe right here, right? Everywhere else, maybe for the snapback rally trade that we took right after the gap down the following day, once this couldn't break the previous day low. But aside from that here, guys, there was really no other area of being long on this chart. If you're looking at the potential of downside, right? Obviously, in hindsight, you could have said this was a great long, but in real time, you know, there's no edge behind taking a long side trade like that, and they oftentimes lose more than they win, right? And the probability is very low, right? So if you keep taking trades like that, you're going to get smoked. Um, yeah, that's just not how typically how these very large volume gaps behave, especially with what the trend was looking like that was already established here before that markdown. So, in my opinion, it's still distribution. Obviously, that doesn't mean anything until we get the very clear signal. So, obviously, that's something that's to be determined. We don't really have any other ones that I see as of right now, but I'm going to go into the sectors here real quick and take a look. Energy is kind of interesting me. I was actually long CVX. And I went green on the trade pretty nicely, and then I went back slightly red on this one, but it was very, very slightly, and I just basically lost because of the spread, so I really wasn't that pissed off about it. I'll be watching this one likely into the new week, or maybe just any sort of energy name. I'm probably going to actually be watching Valero rather than this one. I think Valero is actually the cleanest looking energy name. Um, Take a look at this chart here, guys. I mean, this is a really nice depiction of, like, if you guys go into the weekly, it was a sloping accumulation that eventually failed, and obviously failed and couldn't, like, trade off of this high here, and it couldn't break and base off of that high. So what it rather did here was, if we go take a look at like the daily, we can see how it was kind of accumulating throughout most of this area. It dropped back down into that support, got another gap up, tried to move back higher, got a flat top resistance, pulled its way lower, and then it pulled its way lower into like really heavy, heavy, heavy volume here on the December candle, December OPEX. And then it ripped its way back to the upside. Now it's getting that like high tight flag slash like pennant look here. That's basically trading within discount now on where the previous support was, right around here. That obviously had a shakeout beneath it into really big volume at the bottom of the trend here on December 20th. So I really do like this chart. Do I want to trade it immediately into the new week? I mean, it doesn't really trade that good, but I think it looks really good on the daily. Or if you guys go to the weekly, I think it looks fantastic to see 145. Geez, man, I might just buy like really further out expirations here and see if I could get this one to 145, and then above 145 it's going to go back to 150. Above 150 it's probably moving all the way back up into some of these like gaps to the upside at 156. We have a resistance all the way at 166, right? So, you know, this is a huge level to obviously push towards if sellers can't break it beneath this low, and buyers obviously successfully like defend this area of price. Then this one's going to go back all the way up into here, and then we could reevaluate this one all the way back up into here. But I think that this one could be a crazy good swing trade. I don't know how spready the contracts are, and I'm gonna have to see which area of the options chain is the most vulnerable to trade. That's a very important thing that you guys should do in your preparation. But like Valero is a fantastic looking name, and I'm probably going to be trading this one if energy starts getting some momentum. I think it looks great. I'd probably rather trade further out expiration here, though. Oh man, I could have actually made so much money this week, boys. And not even this week, like just like on the charts that I had a read on for the entirety of last year. If I just stuck with my thesis and with my gut, and like, dude, there was so many clean schematics and entry opportunities here on DraftKings, it wasn't even funny. Uh, so I knew that this higher low right here on the weekly dot, or what am I saying? The yellow dot was a I thought that was the change of hands on the weekly chart, right? And then what happened was if we go into the daily, we could see how this thing was really, really, really holding off on like getting a lower high, right? And there was some signs of it happening, but it like never happened, right? So with this candle right over here, it was a gap down and it was a really nice recovery back to green on the day here, and this was a nice little increase in the volume. And then we just started trading really, really, really tightly on an hourly chart here, right off of like this resistance here in the daily chart. Right around here is whenever I was looking at DraftKings, like, dude, what is going on? Like, we had really nice momentum essentially here right into like this close, or this is actually after hours, and then we just based and based and based within that hourly bar the whole entire time. And then we started to get like pre-market after hours lows and pre-market lows off of that area. We started to get really nice continuation into opens off of that area. And that was actually leading right into the report, and that's why I didn't take it, because I was like, dude, I could definitely think about like a gap and go here with DraftKings, or I can think about taking like a swing trade here, risking the 43 level, and then obviously seeing if I could get that one with a little bit of leeway into the report. And then I thought it was going to mark up from the report, just because of how I've been viewing the chart for a very long amount of time. But I never really got a clean entry here that I felt super comfortable with. And then it moved too fast on this day, and I was like, all right, whatever, it's not worth it. But I was going to build out a smaller, like a bigger, not a smaller expiration, like a bigger sized, further out expiration, like summer expiration on this one. Just because I didn't want to have like really big amounts of risk here on this week with how my trading week was already going. I don't want to have a big amount of risk on the shorter expiration. No way. Um, so yeah, DraftKings will be on the watch here. Let's go into the sectors again here. I got sidetracked. I'm sorry. We already talked about Valero. That's going to be on the watch list right here. Yeah. Uh, Valero's dangerous to trade though. I want everyone to know that. Oxy earnings are something that I'm really interested in. The only reasoning as to why is because, dude, if we could get a markup here, we know exactly where Oxy is going. And it's going to that unfilled gap that we talked about being a target all the way back here. It's if we could get like a decent little markup, it's going to, if it gets a really nice earnings candle, it's going back into that 54 area. This leg of price action to the downside has not been one of strength. It has not been anything that's been really that great. But the energy sector kind of just died off and is now looking for the reaccumulation to take place here off of potentially, your weekly discounted area, right? So I don't necessarily know what's going to happen with energy. And if you guys are looking at like your weekly chart, it's obviously not looking great from like a Wyckoff perspective here. Obviously, we have an external high sitting all the way up to 101.59. And this one has not seen new highs since 2014, right? So there's a lot of divergence between like other sectors and this one. So that's something to potentially take note of here with obviously new policy coming into a new, era that we have here now with Trump and with everything he will announce as we move forward here and just seeing the potential catalysts for some of these sectors. I don't necessarily follow a lot of geopolitical stuff, and I think a lot of it is noise, but if we could build out a reaccumulation on energy, and there's no sign just yet, I want to make that very clear. There's no sign yet. Um, and a lot of these charts I was talking about before, they're building out like digestion of like the earnings candles and finding out basically who wins this area of price here on names like ZOM, right? You have a lot of these other names that are like very, very important critical areas to think about like controlling. And they're very hard, difficult areas to control on a chart, right? Because this has been a resistance here for a long time on CVX. And now we're obviously trying to defend this leg higher throughout the holidays into January here. And then if we get that higher low, that would obviously result in momentum and eventually a break in the structure and a break of that trend line and then a continuation to the upside. But that's going to be very difficult and that could take time, right? So I don't really want to be having my focus too much in that sector as of this week. It's just not really the most worth it thing in the world right now to me. Everything else, like industrials, some of them don't look bad, some of them don't look great. None of them really look too great. Obviously, we had some news with like, what's going on here with my MMM chart? Does anyone know why my chart's doing that? Yeah, so none of those look good. Obviously, we had some decent looking. Miners are probably the worst thing to trade in the world, I would have to think. So I'm not going to be looking over there. Banks, obviously, in no man's land. Nothing really too tradable over there. So yeah, everything's going to be tech related here, guys. Everything's going to be tech related. I'm really interested in why Lulu got absolutely crapped on this badly into Friday. Um, but I'm going to be watching the gap. I'm actually going to put this on the watch list, but not right now. Like, I talk about a chart and someone's going to be in calls tomorrow because it's in the gap. No, that's an ugly candle into the gap. If you guys go into the hourly chart, I hate to be that guy. I really hate to be that guy. There was not a lot of volume on the early morning sell. The volume started to really increase throughout this range. And most of the volume is on these three 15-minute candles, right? There was a very small spread on that candle as well. Volume really dries out, and then volume really ramps back up into the close, right? So that's where most of the volume is actually on this trading day, and that's a decent amount of uptick in volume relative to the rest of the range. This is actually the second heaviest volume day that we had since earnings, right? And the first was the earnings was the day after earnings, right? So very, very alarming amount of volume coming into Lulu here and a pretty weak daily candle here. So not going to be front running this and speculating that it's going to, you know, sweep into the gap and then go like that and go back to the no. We have to look at the last trading day and understand to ourselves things are not necessarily strong here. It doesn't mean that the continuation is going to happen here for the downside on this name here, but like you got to give this one a little bit of time. And then the gap fill that remains all the way down into right here, right? So you could set an alert actually off the gap fill. You can set maybe an alert halfway through the gap fill just to remind yourself. I don't need to do that just because it's going to be on the left of my screen here, but I'm going to be watching Lulu. I'm going to probably need to see this thing on like the weekly, have a good looking candle to trade it. So it's probably not going to be on the watch list this week. Probably going to be on the watch list next week. But yeah, I mean, guys, look at the higher time frames here. This is a really nice, strong candle. We never tested into that bear gap. We did slightly. And when I mean slightly, like extremely slightly. So with that being said, a really, really nice weekly looking candle, and that could be a swing trade all the way back up into 420s again, just like we did before. It's really not too complicated there. I'm going to go grab a glass of water here real quick, and then we'll continue with setups for the future. All right, sorry about that. I'm back. So, uh, other charts. Tesla. I'm probably going to watch Tesla this week. I'm probably going to watch that one. Reasoning as to why is because this has been my range in terms of looking for like a weekly high or low. I really do like the chart. I don't think it has necessarily the characteristics of a full-on out reversal just yet. The weekly looks pretty good to me. If we go into our hourly now and we take a look at smaller time frames, we could see how we had some Tesla news into the close, right? And then they obviously accumulated that, and they got a little bit aggressive with the buyback of that little tiny markdown of 2.7%, right? And then the volume remained very, very rampant here as we got into the close of Tuesday with, like, if you guys go into the 15, you could see how like we were moving lower, but like the character of price here was like, it was a little bit weird to me just because we kept getting these like very large bids that were stepping in off of a sell, right? And then we filled the gap in after hours, and then that's whenever we got this really nice rip throughout the next following day. So with that being said, I think it's only, as of right now, just a simple dead cat bounce from the absolute huge sell that we had from the breakout failure that I was talking about off of the previous high. So now that after we filled the gap, we're putting in like these cleaner looking weekly candles here now. We could potentially see this one being in like a higher low on the weekly chart here now. Like I said, I don't think the fills are really that optimal up here. And I'm probably going to be watching like the overnight gap or maybe a new lower low if this thing wants to sell off a little bit. And I'd be looking for like real trading hours, regular trading hours, this gap to fill, and then potentially get like a higher low, and then eventually like a reaccumulation and a move back up. I think that could be a fantastic trade. Um, so yeah, another one that I really like would be Google, but a little bit lower. I want to see this one in the gap and what it can do. Um, I don't necessarily know if this one's not a long yet. If it were going to be a long, I think we would need to sell and then a push. So I'm going to add an alert off of that gap, and then we'll see what it does. Obviously, you don't want to like front run any sort of gap until you can see the actual signals, and maybe it pushes all the way back lower into the bottom. But this is also kind of in correlation with like the other gap that was filling, turned into a resistance, and now potentially could be a support, which is tying in nicely with that bull gap. So if this could get a gap sweep, it could be a fantastic trade for the upside to probably then cover all of these 4 days of price action, eventually get back up into those high 180s. And that could also be somewhere around that $180 psych area. So that's going to be a trade that I have on my mind, but like a lot of these charts right now don't have super valid entry opportunities where they currently are at. And some of them need a little bit lower, some of them need a little bit more confirmation higher. So it's going to be another difficult week in my opinion. But I'm probably just going to be looking at like 2 to 3 trades on the things I've been talking about, and wrap up the week with like 2 to 3 trades. It's a short week, first of all, so you don't want to be putting on a lot of trades. You don't. And I keep saying this, and people try to put on like trades, and then they try to like catch a huge move in the opposite direction. And there's just not a lot of volatility right now. So I would probably rather long some pullbacks. And if the pullbacks don't happen, I'm going to probably just be doing like some shorter time frame, like smaller expiration trades, like much like no overnight stuff, and seeing how some of this stuff can do like more intraday rather than like higher time frames like your daily swing trades. Um, and if we don't get the pullbacks, I'll just be looking for that sign on Nvidia. And I also kind of want to see what Apple does here up towards the earnings candle, just because, you know, I can't say that these charts are done yet for the downside until they get above those, or they get these pullbacks, and those pullbacks are bought up, right? These are just absolutely vertical rallies to the upside that are, it looks like there's no sellers really participating anywhere. The other only long side trade idea that I do have would be like AMD. I would like to see AMD hold off of like all of these daily resistance areas that we're finally now getting through, but like the price is not strong. We have an inside bar here. We have a gap all the way up into 119.50. Keep in mind, this name has become really, really crowded. But I think the underperformance on AMD is eventually coming to an end here soon. If you guys go into the weekly, really doesn't really look that great. Um, that's why I probably won't be watching this one, and I'd rather watch some of the other semis. LRCX, MU, and then I also want to watch INTC. I think it needs some digestion on this recent rally to the upside, and there's a lot of volume at the top here. And I would like to see a pullback, but if that pullback can pull into some of these gaps, pull into some of these levels that make sense to hold, like this one right here, around 22, that could be a potential buy opportunity there on INTC. And yeah, that's about it. Nothing else really looks too good in my opinion. I could go through all my sectors and all my stocks that I trade. None of this stuff really looks too good yet. I would say Docu looks okay. Can't stand trading names like that sometimes, though. I still think Home Depot is going to be pulling into that gap. It's just those contracts are so spready that name can really screw you over. I like JD. Stocks so dumb crowded. LOY, yeah, it's a little too high though. Well, it actually got a pullback. Um, I'll probably throw LOY on there. Kind of do like that one. Kind of gotta see a candle that looks decent somewhere off of like a higher low on this resistance. Or yeah, you could just pull the fibs from the lows to the highs and start looking at like a discounted area or like a red to green move off of that into the low 800s. I think Rivian actually looks decent, but it has earnings. The only other name I'm going to hold a little bit of relevance towards would be XYZ. If we start getting like it has earnings as well, so we can't really. Never mind. I think I have the right names on the watch list here, guys. I really do. I don't like that Disney candle, but I like the higher time frames on Disney. Is there any charts you guys like? I'm gonna end the recording now and just bullshit with you guys.